Exactly. So, hello everyone again. We are starting our next community call and Ask Me Anything session. Today, we have a very general topic in hand. We want to talk about decentralized identity and the latest news and latest the updates that everyone has in the space of decentralized identity. And we're going to have nice conversation with each other, telling each other what we have heard and what we have learned recently. So yeah, that's the main point of today. Before we started the call, Adam was telling us that in a conversation with the Ethereum Foundation, he was asked if they should start or they should keep the funding all these different projects on the decentralized identity, or should they rather focus on the funding the ones that are currently working on that? And Adam was basically telling us that in his the opinion, yeah, the second one is a better approach because yeah, many of them are working on the same project, doing in working on similar methods. But that was one of my starting questions that uh, do you see the future of identity and especially decentralized identity of having all these like tens of options that people should choose from, or rather like be active on a number of them, or rather, as you said, having a limited number of the projects working on them and people being in the being like in the hands of like a handful of projects that are providing this platform of creating your identity. And do you want to like elaborate on why you think these current projects should be uh, funded more and more active rather than attracting more projects starting working on identity?
Yeah, so I like the idea of more research happening on social graph analysis based methods of identifying symbols. And so yeah, I think if we can be kind of an open platform that can serve as a test bed for those new algorithms and also allow everyone to benefit that's using BrightID when those innovations come out. I think that's perfect. And I think if there's other if there are other unique person solutions that use um, that use those algorithms in a different way, that's fine. Um, the core of BrightID has to do with making connections and also the metadata, the privacy preserving, hopefully, metadata um, that comes with making those connections so that you kind of have this rich layer of connections, and anyone should be able to use that. That's our thesis with BrightID. So the graph is open. Um, things like names and photos and identifying information are not part of the graph, but the anonymized graph is just completely open. And so it's like that doesn't, I mean, like no BrightID nodes collect that information all in one place, but um, it should be easy to import and export, easy to, so unlike Facebook, like this is what Facebook got wrong, is they sort of became this public good of like your social graph, your social network. And then, but they kept it for themselves. Like you can't export your Facebook social graph, and you can't take it to another platform and say, okay, I just want a different experience, but I want my same social graph. So I'm going to export my social graph from Facebook and import it somewhere else. The same way that you could take like a spreadsheet file and export it from Google Sheets and import it into like Microsoft Excel on your computer. I mean, they have this interoperability, and Facebook doesn't. They don't want that. I mean, it's actually part of their monopolistic business model to take something that's a public good and just try to like take all the value for themselves. So that's wrong, and we don't want to follow down that path. So we want to make it as easy as possible for people to import and export the social graph data, and um, and so we just see ourselves as facilitators in helping people to create that data that can then be used to generate proofs of uniqueness for themselves that they can share with applications in a very anonymous way. That's the part where the privacy is the most critical to us, is what you share with applications. You should never have to make a compromise where you say, okay, well, I want to prove that I'm unique, but to do so, I've got to show I'm going to share something with app A that shows that I'm also a user of app B. I mean, that's exactly what we want to avoid. We don't want you to have to like link all your different internet profiles together just to show to some application that you're unique. So we want everyone to stay private and stay as anonymous as they want to be. However, having said that, when you're making connections with other people, you are revealing something about yourself, and that's up to you. Like, you decide what you want to reveal. Keep in mind that if you share your name and profile with someone else, they could turn around and share that with someone else. Like you've kind of like, you have to trust who you're connecting to. So you got to be careful about that. So if someone shows up to a connection party and says, hey, I don't want to connect to anyone here except the host, that should be their choice. Or if they
Mhm.
say, I just don't like connection parties, I don't like this format, I think it's kind of sketchy that I'm connecting to a bunch of people that I don't really know, I don't even know this host, I don't want to connect to that person. There should be other ways to get verified on BrightID. So that's what we want to work towards. So anyways, as far as like sharing your decentralized identity and sharing this proof of uniqueness and generating this proof of uniqueness and encouraging all kinds of research, we want to be a platform that allows that to happen. And we don't want anyone to be like trapped. We're not trying to go the Facebook way to like capture everyone into our system. It's more like we're facilitating this type of connection making that and these type of proofs, the generation of these type of proofs that you can then use anywhere you want. So yeah, that's what we're doing. And yeah, so we hope that other solutions can just use BrightID as is, and we hope that no one feels so constrained by it that they need to make a clone of it. We hope that they can just work with BrightID or work on BrightID. That that whatever format they need the connections in, that they can get them in that format. That whatever that those whatever format they need the proofs in, proof of uniqueness, they can get the format. If they want to generate their own proof of uniqueness using their own algorithms, they should be able to do that. We should make a platform that makes it easy to do that. And people can run their own BrightID nodes to analyze the graph and generate their own proofs. So that's what we're going for. And yep, so because of that, I hope that there's a lot of research done that can help with that, like help with that whole system, and that things like the Ethereum Foundation can fund that research without having to feel like they're playing favorites, that they're just, like picking BrightID. I hope that everyone can benefit from new anti-Sybil algorithm research. So that's my point of view on that whole thing. Yes, Victor has a question.
Yeah, I mean the theme is the decentralized identity, right?
Yep,
So I think it's worthy to talk about other kinds of identities. Like
sure.
what more is this? Virtual identity, real identity,
Yeah,
centralized identity, which what it is or what is the benefits of a decentralized identity?
yeah, thank
And
you.
what are the other things?
Yeah, thank you. So what do you think about that? Because I've
Well,
been talking a lot. What do you have to say about it?
Well, in the real world, there is a identification, and must be just one identification, not identity, but identification. And when you have to be proof the identification, but the government or but the state and the country you live, right? There are the organization or the institution that have the power to give you identification. So that's like kind of centralized identification. But if we said that BrightID is giving you an identification, BrightID is like making the same labor that this institution. So it's a kind of centralized because BrightID got the powers to give you that identification and give it, take you away too. So is decentralized in the technology, but in the concept is centralized. So I think it's worthy to talk about that.
Yeah. So I don't think that so when you create a BrightID identifier, um, I don't think that let's see, how can we put this? Um, First of all, um, it's not like BrightID assigns you an identifier, like that's what governments do. It's more like you create an identifier and you tell BrightID that you're starting to use it. The very first time that BrightID knows about your identifier is when you first make a connection. So it'll see, okay, here's a new identifier, and this new identifier has made a connection. Um, and the way I know this is true is because sometimes we'll see people who so we saw in the last Gitcoin round, we saw some curious cases that we investigated that we didn't really understand, and I guess we still don't understand what's going on even after talking to the people who did it. We still don't completely understand. But what happened was they would link, they would create their own identifier, which is what you do on BrightID. Then they would link their identifier to Gitcoin, but they never made any connections with anybody. And so BrightID didn't know about them. And so it's this curious case where like someone is linking their identifier, but BrightID doesn't even know that it exists. And so we couldn't really, all we knew that they hadn't made any connections. Um, so uh, anyways, um, you create your identifier, you start making connections. As you start making connections, you share that with BrightID. The reason why you share it, so if you use the BrightID app, it'll share connections that you make with, it'll obviously share them with the person that you're connecting. It shares that directly, but it also shares it with nodes in the BrightID network. And the reason why you choose to do that is because that's how you get verified. Like these Gitcoin people, that they were saying, why am I not verified? Well, you're not verified because you didn't make any connections like that, and no one, like none of the BrightID nodes knew that you were making connections, and so they had no way, like nothing to go from to try to um, decide whether you're unique or a Sybil. And so you make some connections and you say, I'm going to share this evidence with BrightID nodes that run their algorithms. And then if I share enough evidence with them, then they can say that I'm unique. So this is much different than like a government identifier, which it kind of happens in the reverse order with the government identifier. The government says, okay, we've done our background research on you, and we think that you're a citizen of our country, so we're going to give you an identifier. And BrightID operates exactly the opposite way. It's like you create your own identifier, and then you start gathering evidence, and you start submitting that evidence to whoever. Like anyone can be listening in, anyone can run a BrightID node. You start submitting that evidence to BrightID nodes, and then they can decide in their own way whether they think you're unique, whether you qualify for some benefit that some app might want to give. Does that help a little bit?
Oh, I'm sure that is very helpful.
I think I want to add something there and to what you said, Adam. And I think like where governments are, are ubiquitous handing out of identity. It's our main place where we get our identity from, and places are generally accept those pieces of identity. With BrightID, it's completely opt-in. Whether an app or a place, like if I go to the liquor store today and say, oh, I have a BrightID, can I have some booze? They're gonna laugh at me, right? But it would also be kind of funny if I went there and they said, oh, we don't accept driver's licenses provided by your government, right? So it's very opt-in, and in that way, it's, I believe, a progressive decentralization where the more places that choose to opt in and accept it, it becomes more widely used. And those places could then decide what algorithm they want to trust in order to determine somebody as verified. And I think Adam was kind of saying that in a different way, but and earlier on where we have research being put into social graph analysis that would create different, levels, so to speak, or different criteria of verification. And in that way, it's very much decentralized. And BrightID is just a graph that can be analyzed. It's pure data, and what you do with that data is up to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jordan. I also want to make sure that people realize the privacy implications of government IDs versus BrightID. So a government identifier like a social security number is this number that gets passed around, and that just passing around that number can be like a security issue, especially because like the people that you share it with could choose to store it, and they could put it in a database along with other information. And guess what? This has happened before. When Equifax had their data breach, it's like, okay, half of US social security numbers along with other data was leaked to attackers. If that happened with any other sort of identifier, the recommended recourse would be to everyone should get new ones. Like if a password file gets leaked or something, it's the proper thing to do for the like the website or whatever that did that happened to let everyone know, like, hey, everybody, you need to change your password. So Equifax let us know, and like the steps should have been, okay, everybody change your social security number. But I think you see the problem in that. Like, it's this thing that only the government can do. They have this slow, cumbersome, like expensive process to create these identifiers. They do the background check first, and they're not gonna, like, it's extremely difficult to get a new one. So they've really kind of like, they have this system that was created in the 1940s, and it was not made for the internet. And yet we use it on the internet. Like we actually enter our social security numbers for like credit score places and stuff like that. And we hand our social security numbers around on the internet. So it's a terrible idea. And as far as like privacy with BrightID, so I mentioned the Gitcoin example. We actually, that identifier that they have is not the it's not your BrightID. So it's different from a social security number. So we like they can look up using something called blind signatures. They can look up whether or not a node thinks you're verified using an identifier that you've committed to with that application, and that you're not that is only for that application. So you can't, two different applications can't say, okay, I've seen your identifier, and therefore I know you have you have an account on this application, and you have an account on this application, and maybe even link it to different like profile data or something. They just can't do that. They have an identifier that is basically a single use identifier that they get for you, and so we use like cryptographic security to keep your privacy, whereas social security numbers do not. And like even some of the more advanced government solutions like e-passports and stuff, they so it's much better. Obviously, they're designed to be used online, but they still can result in unwanted linkage between applications if they were to be used in that way. So BrightID's identifiers are just much better. They're like we're doing it in the right way, and we want to set an example. I think someone asked, oh yeah, I guess it was an interview that I was doing, not one of these AMA calls, but someone asked me if governments could use BrightID, and I think yes, they can, because we have something that is more secure than what they have to offer, more private. And so like they have their own system, thinking of like the stimulus checks that recently got sent out to US citizens. They used their existing tax system because that's the best that they had. So you had to be enrolled in the tax system, and all this other information about you associated with your dividend and whether you qualified for it, when really what they all they needed to know was, are you well, I guess they did actually stipulate it on how much money you made, so maybe they did need some tax information, but they excluded a bunch of people who shouldn't have been excluded, who weren't in the tax system. Like let's say that you just don't have an address because you live in a tent. Like here in Seattle, you know, property like home prices have gone way up, which is great for people who own a house, but you know, there's people who work jobs and live in a tent under the freeway. So if you're one of those people, you can't get the stimulus check. Like who, you know, who needs it the most and they can't get it. So like BrightID can help with something like that to augment existing systems and include more people. But anyways, yeah, like I think we have a lot of advantages over traditional traditional identifiers, especially ones that come from governments.
Other than governments trying to use BrightID, I was wondering if there has been talks of decentralized identity projects working together. I remember we had a call. I think that the most the like known one to be integrated with all these projects is POAPs. We have been using POAPs in all our community calls, using and providing them to our guests here. So that's one way of an integration, so to speak. I'm not sure if there has been other integrations or alignments between these different identity projects on the Ethereum ecosystem. Do you have anything in mind in that regard? Has anyone heard of any integration between two identity projects using each other's social graph, maybe using each other's methods, maybe?
We talk about it a lot, and I think, I mean, I think it's inevitable. It just makes sense. I think that a lot of solutions are sort of like looking to use BrightID eventually. I think Proof of Humanity is thinking about it. Circles UBI is thinking about it. Dunator is thinking about it. I think it's just when the timing is right, I think they will use it, because I think it's too important of a basis to not use like social graph data. So just to give you an example of Proof of Humanity. So Proof of Humanity is this registry where people vouch for each other to get on this public registry. So I think there's enough barriers to make it work fairly well right now. Like there's costs that would slow down a Sybil attack, but without integrating something like BrightID, let's say that you had a determined attacker that had some money and just wanted to get a foothold into the system with their Sybils, they could, maybe get a few friends to work with them even, and vouch for some identities in there. And then once they had enough, I guess, vouching power among their group of attackers, they could start creating Sybils and vouching for their own Sybils, and basically create just like a bubble of Sybils that they can then just, and then the Sybils can verify more Sybils, and it's like this snowball effect. And the best way to prevent something like that is social graph analysis, because then you can see, oh, look, like all these, like you can see this region of like, okay, all these people are vouching for all these other people in this kind of like closed region, and it's not very well connected. Like it's very isolated from this other region of the graph. So Proof of Humanity in a way is kind of like, if you look at the like links between who's vouching for whom, it's starting to create this graph structure, but they're not yet analyzing the graph. So yeah, I mean, integrating with BrightID would be an obvious choice. Something like Circles a couple of years ago, Martin said, hey, Circles depends on a social graph. BrightID has a social graph. Can we just use your social graph? And I said, yeah, that's fine. You can. That's totally appropriate. So what I said before about just like if you have a way to make connections that's portable and interoperable, then you can just like share between things, like when you make a connection in Circles, it means something in BrightID. When you make a connection in BrightID, it means something in Circles. When you make a vouch in Proof of Humanity, it means something in BrightID, and vice versa. So it's like, yeah, we should all be integrating. I think it's just a matter of time before that happens. I think it's just a matter of time before that becomes a big priority for applications, once they or sorry, not applications, networks, once they see like, okay, our network could be better if we bring in your network, and our network would be stronger if we combine networks. Once that, at some point, that'll become so compelling that it's just like, it'll kind of push us to do it.
I was on mute. Jordan, you were
I was just gonna
saying
say
something.
one extra thing is like, I think it's with a lot of networks is like nobody wants to be the first, no one wants to be the last, so it's gonna happen slowly and then all of a sudden. And I think BrightID just in general makes networks better. And so it's like, the cherry on top if your application needs some sort of unique identifier. we just make it better, right? It just like enhances that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I also hope these other projects can take advantage of our privacy aspects to make their allow their users to be more private. I I like the proof of humanity experiment. I'm a little bit wary about like a registry of like videos of people and what that exactly means. Um, so and like other data. So I don't know, maybe there's some way that that could be done in a more private way, but it's hard to know. I'm also skeptical that um, that like people are actually going to be able to go through the registry and search for duplicates. So anyways, there's different approaches. I think that different approaches should be allowed. People should try those things, see if they work. And but yeah, we should have this interoperable social graph because it does make everything better, I think. If someone can figure out how to integrate IDENA and BrightID, let me know because I haven't figured that one out yet. But you mentioned POAPs, so that's POAPs is like an interesting one because it's like that could be used. I've always thought that on a small scale you could use something like a really secure POAP to solve the unique identity problem. Imagine that you wanted to have like an online organization that had like 200 people in it and they could do voting, and you wanted to make sure that there were no Sybil accounts or something like that. And you wanted a secure way to let people in, but you also want it to be pseudonymous. One thing you could do is you could just have like an in-person party and just say, okay, show up at our in-person party. We're going to on your way out, we're gonna like register your identifier and add you to this closed group, and then now you have proof of uniqueness of everybody that came to that. You have like this pseudonymous proof of uniqueness for everybody that showed up to that secure event or using secure POAP. So so I mean, I think it's interesting. Um, it could definitely relate to identity in some way, a unique identity in some way.
Hey,
So
Adam, I don't
yep.
know if you have seen already the new task from Rabbit Hole. They updated the platform a little bit. They have now something called skills. For
Nice.
them, well, there's an skill for BrightID. You need to get
Yep.
verified, of course, but they have an identity pro. I will link a BrightID with an ENS name. So like they're using that right now, like a higher level for them for
Like a
identification.
bright ID with an ENS name.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so
what they're
I
using.
actually don't like that. I'll tell you why, because
Is it
like
public?
that's I don't know. I think that kind of goes against what Bright ID is trying to do. We can't stop people from doing that, but it's like saying okay, show us, like, reveal more about yourself and we'll feel more confident about your identity. And so I would rather have I don't know, what are they going to do? Like, are they going to go do some research on those people based on their are they going to like research what they've been doing, like what crypto they've been sending around, and use that to try to decide whether they're unique or not? So I'm a little confused about what the motives are there. So I would be careful of something like that.
So with Rabbit Hole specifically, the goal is to have on-chain data be used as a form of resume for people. So the use case is a little bit different, and you are kind of meant to be identifying yourself to be like, my name is so and so. I've done these tasks on the blockchain, meaning I am, more knowledgeable about crypto primitives and so on and so forth. Give me a job because I have all this experience, that sort of thing. So yeah, just to give more context for that piece there.
Oh, okay, I appreciate it. Okay, I mean, as long as so yeah, I mean, you just have to be really careful because so I assume that the identifier that they're linking to the ENS is it's obviously not like your real BrightID, because that would be really bad if they say like, oh, here's how you find out your BrightID, like go to the Explorer, look up your BrightID and tell us what your real BrightID is. Like that completely bypasses the way that like the private way that we've provided for apps, and the way that you should be linking your BrightID. But let's assume that they're doing it the right way. They probably are. And so they get a unique identifier that's linked to a BrightID that's not the actual BrightID identifier from the graph. And then it, like now you're potentially linking that single identifier to a bunch of different things. And yeah, if you're building up a resume, that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying, okay, well, look, like here's a link to my university career, and here's a link to this other job that I had. Here's a link to like this volunteer work that I did. So you're linking all these different aspects of your identity together. And that's kind of what a resume does. And so people are intentionally doing that. And then I guess as one little check mark on your resume, you're saying, oh, and by the way, BrightID says that I'm unique. Here's my little check mark that shows that. That's fine. I would just be careful that we don't demand users to like link a bunch of data together that they would prefer to keep separate, because I think it's really important that people are able to keep like distinct parts of themselves on in different applications, to be able to say like, hey, I don't want you, like no one should know that, like I should be able to prove that this Reddit account has a unique person behind it, but I don't want people to know that this is like this Reddit user is the same person that like did this volunteer work and uses this other app and like has this on my resume. So as long as we're intentional and we're careful about what we link together, and we as applications don't push people to link things together that they really don't want to do, then I think we're fine. And in the case of resumes, I guess we're kind of used to that. When whoever's reviewing our resume looks through all this linked together data just to like get to know us better, and we voluntarily put that out there. I mean, that's pretty normal socially to do things like that. So it sounds like it might be okay.
Have you or any of our guests here heard of any decentralized identity project outside of Ethereum ecosystem?
Yeah, I've heard of a pretty interesting one called KILT, KILT, in the Polkadot ecosystem.
How's that work?
Yeah, so it works on using attestations and guarantee people to verify these attestations. So an individual can be like, I know how to drive, and make that claim. And then there's a verifier out there like the DMV that says, yes, I verify this person knows how to drive. And that is one kind of data point. And then you can say, I have graduated from such and such university. You make that claim, and then the university says, yes, this person has graduated. And that's another data point. And you collect all of these different data points and connections that then create this overall identity. So the premise is that identity is like a growing and contracting malleable kind of thing. consisting of several different connections, several different data points that make up an identification. And there's different identifiers that come together to make this happen.
Yeah, Ceramics IDX is like that. And theirs is blockchain agnostic. They have their own network that I think actually maybe I'm not right about it being blockchain agnostic. Well, it might use IPFS, but it might not. I'm not actually sure where the data is pinned. It might be flexible on that. But anyways, yeah, it's this like decentralized just storage network of data streams. And then the IDX is like an identity, your identity profile that when it's done right, and the one that you just mentioned that was on Polkadot, maybe they're doing it right. But when done right, it allows you to share what you want. And so like in privacy preserving ways. So if I share with you a proof that I'm, that I'm eligible to drive, then you don't get to, number one, you don't get to like reuse my proof to show that you can drive. And number two, you don't get to share that with anyone else without my permission. So, and so if we respect those two things, then I think that self-sovereign identity can be a really beautiful thing and much better than like not having it. So, so yeah, I mean, I think things like that are good, and we should encourage that. And they have like, I mean, a bunch of different uses that go beyond BrightID, but they, when done right, they follow like the same pattern of how they're implemented that BrightID does. It's that that you don't violate users' wishes and you don't violate their privacy. So it sounds cool, and like I think I hope that everyone gets to have their own identity wallet. That's what I really hope. I hope that these solutions are widespread enough that we all get to use self-sovereign identity.
Cool.
I would like to add something or ask something. These IDX, I don't know so much about the Polkadot one, but IDX and Ceramics, these are different though, different from BrightID in that they're not concerned about civil resistance or uniqueness, right? I have not heard them talk about civil resistance and
Exactly.
right.
Yeah, I think what we have in common is like a dedication and kind of like a first principles of privacy first, and user control. That's why it's called self-sovereign. So so they have those, they share the same principles, and it's related. I mean, the type of data you're sharing is somewhat related, whether you're sharing like, because ultimately what you get back from a BrightID node is a certification that you're unique. They also have like 3 boxes played around with making, like generating connections between other people, like making connections. And so, if they do that, if that's done properly, then that can also be potentially interoperable with BrightID connections. When I say properly, I mean, it's important to know the source of connections that are being made, because if it's like a connection that was made because someone had a connection request sitting in your Facebook inbox, then to me, that's a much lower like a much lower quality connection than something that was made because you intentionally connected with someone on BrightID using an existing trusted channel, which is like the only way to make connections on BrightID. So, yeah, so depending on how those connections are made in 3 boxes can also be really useful. And you could have, and like any of these identity indexes or identity wallets could have some BrightID verifications in there, just to say like, okay, I want to share with whoever I want to share it with that I've been verified as unique in this platform or on this application. I'm going to share that as I see fit and in a privacy preserving way, and in a way that someone can't just like steal that certification and use it as if it were their own. But yeah, I mean, so I guess to answer your question, they're not specifically solving that problem, but they're solving like a more general, they have a more general solution that can include BrightID and also does things in a has like the same sorts of goals as, or the same sorts of like cares about the same sorts of values that we have in BrightID.
Right.
So I think it's really cool.
Yeah, and I think I think it's another instance where BrightID would just make that network better, where we focus more on the uniqueness part of things. But I think from their perspective, the uniqueness is pushed to the verifier, like, you know, the DMV in this case. Like, they want to make sure that you're unique in order to attest that yes, you can drive or something like that. And then as the user, the more data points you have, the more you know, attestations you have that yes, you're this age, you're this person with these qualifications, so on and so forth. That becomes a unique identifier when put together, right? It becomes this snowflake of like, how likely is it that somebody's going to have all the exact same attestations, right? And then it becomes a decision on the behalf, or on the, it becomes a decision for the apps that want to use these identifiers to decide what qualifications they need. So, you know, if you want to claim this UBI, you need to prove that you're a citizen of this, of a country, and you're of a certain age, and I don't know, you have a name that starts with J. I don't know, like, you know, you can decide whatever you
Like
want.
a terrible UBI.
We have a massive worldwide changing of everybody's name to start with J. Like, but it becomes a decision on the app side of things, like what are the qualifications are to determine you as unique.
Yeah, and so I think that these other certifications could become and be enhanced. Like, let's say that a DMV wants to prove that their employees aren't just in some back room somewhere, like cranking out tons of fake driver's licenses. Then they could, at the points, like the checkpoints where those certifications are used, like the driver's license certification is used, they could also throw in a BrightID as an additional check. Like, say, we're going to check that you're BrightID verified, plus we're going to check that you have a driver's license. And that shows that like Bob in the back room wasn't just like creating tens of thousands of driver's licenses and selling them on the black market or something.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting model, and we've talked about this before, like offline, where when we get like a recursive cycle of identification pieces requiring BrightID, but then that information gets fed back into BrightID to be analyzed, and then that cycle happens. And I haven't fully like wrapped my head around how that's going to look in the future, but I think it's an interesting thing to kind of think about.
Okay. I think we're coming to the hour, and I wonder if there is anything anyone wants to talk about before we stop the recording. Is there anything anyone wants to talk about now? Are we good? I think we're good. Okay. Before I stop recording, I want to thank everyone for being here, taking the time, and taking part in this conversation. I'm gonna stop recording now. Thank you, everyone. There you go.